No one knows how they're doing it, but someone is sneaking in and out of the dorms at night without being seen. I heard it was a ghost, one of many ghosts that haunt Stragview. A ghost? Boy, you'll believe anything, won't you? Ghosts don't cut people's throat in their sleep. It's probably one of the guards, or one of the ex-guards. B50967 could feel their eyes shift to him, but he kept sitting at the table in the day room playing solitaire. The murder of the week before had been all that they had talked about for the last couple of days, and it was becoming tiresome. Nah, couldn't be him. That dopehead never does anything but sit around and mope. Whatever killed these guys has some flair, some ice in their veins, and whatever sand that one had tumbled out when they caught him. As he played, B50967 planned his next move. Charles Lamorne had been easy to kill, the easiest yet by far. B50967 had observed that his target never left outside without a group, and that he never took any risk or talked too much to anyone. He wouldn't catch him as easily as he had caught Daniels or McCormick. No, this one would take some work. He had taken some risks to get him. He had slithered out the fire door in the dorm, something he knew he could do without getting caught, crept into the dorm while the guard on shift talked on the phone. E-dorm had no trip sensor in the door, but it did make a lot of racket if you weren't careful. While the guard jabbered at someone equally as bored in a different dorm, B50967 had crept amongst the sleepers and found the one he wanted. Lemoyne had opened his eyes as he opened his throat, but he had cut just right, and he hadn't made a sound as he pulled the blanket over the top of him. That had been 4 days ago, but he already had another target, and this one would make number 5. Frank Weiss, E2, 18 low, salt and pepper hair, 6'2", Jesse tattoo on chest. He'd seen the man, and the cat had seen the man, but old One Ear had only been able to tail him for a little while. Hermes was walking with a little limp these days because after the second time the cat had trailed him, the rumor was that Frank had punted the cat across the yard. The guards hadn't done anything, it was just a stray cat after all, but B50967 was sure that this had painted a target on the man's back as far as the warden was concerned. The health of Hermes, however, was secondary when compared to the increased security around Frank Weiss. They had moved in a cluster when he had been tracking Charles, but now they never seemed to go anywhere. The group had been absent from chow, canceling or refusing any call-outs, and hadn't even gone to rec in the last few days. They had likely been living off canteen food, but they couldn't subside like this forever. If they wanted to keep up the standard of living they were used to, they would have to go out, they would have to get supplies, and they would need to conduct business. Now it appeared that B50967 would have to go to them again. The problem was that after 3 murders, the compound was on high alert. Extra hands had been brought in on each shift, and the eyes watching the compound were many. The chances of getting caught would be high, but what else could he do? He had to get his target, and something new had come up as well. Hermes had come to him this morning, walking a little less stiffly, and given him a message that spoke volumes of the warden's intentions. He was getting desperate. B50967 could see it in his words, and this note had been the first to contain a timeline. Something is going on with your targets. They are preparing for something, and my sources tell me it may come to a head on Halloween. I need you to move your timetable up, or the men I need eliminated may move beyond your grasp. Get it done, but be smart, and destroy this after reading. B50967 had flushed it right away. He was no fool. He wouldn't just leave evidence around for someone to find. He hadn't killed so many without being smart about incriminating himself, though not as smart as he had thought, apparently. He picked up his cards and went to his cell as they called for evening chow. There was nothing else for it. He would have to risk it. He stayed in that night, preparing for his job, and when the lights went out, he knew the time would soon be right. He kept watching the clock, waiting for 11:30, but he also kept a watch on the bubble that sat above the quad. There were still 2 officers there, something that hadn't happened in a while, but he knew that pretty soon the sergeant would leave, and he would be able to make his move. Once the sergeant left, the officer who stayed would get comfortable and doze off, figuring he didn't have any reason to keep a close eye. All his charges were tucked in tight, and they wouldn't be out till breakfast. 11:40, 11:45, 11:50, 11:55. Midnight came and went, but as the sergeant came down for a round, he saw him head out the front door after finishing the last quad and not return to the station. B50967 looked at the clock. It was only 12:10, and he could make it there and back before the sergeant returned for another round. He glanced at the station and found it empty. The officer had gone to the bathroom, it appeared, and so he keyed the door with the paper jam he had made and made his way out. The quad was full of snoring and light breathing, but he passed unremarked as he went to the back door. The key slid in, and he was out before the man came back from the bathroom. He had 45 minutes on the clock to stick someone and come back before he was missed. Plenty of time. He snuck through the darkened grounds of Stragview, careful to avoid the well-lit areas like the sidewalks or the fronts of dorms. He was familiar with the few cameras that dotted the yard, and he was careful to give them a wide berth. His dorm wasn't terribly far from E-dorm, but it did require him to sneak in front of the fence for J-dorm, the abandoned death house. J had been closed about a year after he had started at the prison, and there had never been any definitive answers as to why. He didn't know where the prison was keeping its death row inmates now, but it certainly wasn't in there. The building loomed behind the fence like a haunted house, and sometimes at night you could see strange lights from behind the windows. Inmate B50967 would freely sneak into almost any dorm, but the death house was where he drew the line. There was nothing in there that he wanted bad enough to risk his life. He was coming around the fence that closed off the rec yard, E-dorm within sight, when the side door suddenly opened. 2 people stepped out. One of them was the sergeant that he had been waiting on to leave before he stepped out, but the other, to his surprise, was the man he'd been hunting this whole time. It was hard to tell in the light, but the build was right, and he had the salt and pepper hair that the description had given him. Inmate B50967 felt like he had been given another lucky break. He wondered if it was Providence or something darker that kept putting these men under his hands. They walked towards the yard, and when the sergeant took out his keys and opened the gate, inmate B50967 pressed himself against the fence. He hoped the shadows that he was in would be deep enough to hide him from the eyes of the 2 men, and as the lock came off and the 2 stepped into the rec yard shed that sat beside the entrance, inmate B50967 was once again very lucky. The sergeant had not locked the gate behind him, and it was easy to slip inside and creep towards the door, the one that separated the yard office from the rest of the yard. The 2 were standing inside the dark shed, the light of the officer's computer illuminating them both in the sickly glow. They were arguing about something, their attention on each other, and it was easy for Hunter to creep up on them. "I got your note. What do you need to talk about? This sort of thing is dangerous. If Clarence hadn't been on tonight, I don't know how I would have justified pulling you out after midnight. I just need to be sure that everything is going according to plan. There's about a week to go, and Hadrian's getting worse. I really need this to go off without a hitch so I can get that totem from him before he goes completely crazy." He eased the door open a little further, wanting to slip in while they fought. If Hadrian's losing his mind, then why are you still following him? This is dangerous enough as it is. I don't need to be throwing in with some inmate with a screw loose. Hadrian is fine, Frank said, a little defensively. It's that totem that's making him nuts. He won't let go of it, and it's always whispering to him. He says he needs it for whatever it is that we're doing here, and that scares me even more. Have you heard anything from the warden's people? Do they know what's going on here? A little more, and he'd be able to slip inside just a little wider. If they do, they haven't said anything to me. I'm eager to get this over with, though. I don't like this, and I don't want to get tied up in this when the warden figures out what happened. Then do your part and move on. Hadrian has already said you'll be rewarded for your efforts, and you'll just have to... Providence, it seemed, had abandoned inmate B50967. The door creaked on the last few inches, and both of them turned to look at him as he crouched in the doorway. The inmate he'd been talking to shrank back, clearly not wanting to be noticed, but the sergeant became indignant. He didn't reach for his radio, he just balled his fist up and stepped towards inmate B50967. What in the hell are you doing out of bed at this hour, and on the rec yard to boot? How did you get here? I got a good mind to... But he stopped talking when the hunter slid his knife into him. He kept on sliding the knife into him until the sergeant went down in a puddle of his own blood. He was twitching and gurgling, and inmate B50967 was pretty sure that he had hit something in the lower intestine. He took out a rag from his pocket and wiped down the handle of the blade. Then he turned to Frank as the man cringed in the corner. Wait, don't, I can help you. We can... But the hunter didn't care. He stuck another knife in Frank, and by the time he was done, he had stabbed both of them about 50 times. It wasn't until he was dragging Frank over by the sergeant, making it look like they had killed each other in a fight, that he realized it wasn't Frank. He didn't know the man, but he was around the same size as Frank and had the same salt and pepper hair that had led to the misidentification. He believed this one might be called Marcus or something like that, but it didn't matter now. He staged the scene, putting the prints on the knives, and then made his way back to the dorm before he was missed. He supposed he had time now. Wasn't like the sergeant was going to come and catch him out of bed, was he? He was back in his bed and sound asleep by the time the alarm had been raised. When Frank, or Marcus, or whoever, couldn't be found at the 3 o'clock count, they had raised an alarm and an emergency count had been called. When the sergeant also couldn't be found for the count, the compound had been checked and rechecked. They didn't find them until damn near dawn, and that raised a new alarm. The going story was that the Sergeant Thompson, was the one killing the inmates, and that Marcus had just managed to get the better of him when he tried. It was all over the compound, and B50967 was hoping it might help him go unnoticed. When he came back to his cell after being dragged out of the day room and counted for the half-a-dozenth time, Hermes was waiting for him. The note under his collar made him sigh in relief. Marcus Green was on my list already, so kudos on the kill. I will even give you credit for Sergeant Thomas, the traitor that walked amongst us. You have 3 to kill next, and something to take into custody for me. I need Frank Weiss, Hadrian Caravel, and Gabriel Smith, all of them from E-Dorm, eliminated before November 1st. Hadrian has an item, a totem made of rock, that you will bring to me as well. Do this, and there will be only one more kill between you and freedom. Do not disappoint me. B50967 flushed the note after reading. He would not disappoint. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.